Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be my 9.2 Destruction Warlock feedback slash wanted changes, I guess, video. Similar to the AF one I put out a few days ago, and in a couple days we'll put out the Demonology one as well. Now, in it, we're going to be talking about talents, conduits, covenants, tier sets, I guess tier gear for 9.2, depending how you want to look at it. Legendaries, I guess some rotations based on abilities, but basically the big points and things that I would like to see changed for Destruction to, I guess, make it a better spec, prog-wise, even farm-wise, just in general in patch 9.2. Now, out of all three Warlock specs, Destro was probably like, Demo and Destro were pretty hyped going into patch 9.1 and Sanctum Domination, but out of all three specs, Destro, Demo, and AF, Destro was the biggest letdown. Even numerically compared to what we thought it would be, it just wasn't as strong, as powerful. Now, we weren't expecting it to be like this single target powerhouse, but even when it came to like these semi-relevant cleave fights, like 2-target cleave, you just play Demo on the 9, partially like the final phase being single target. You even like Paintsmith, where you have decent bits of cleave. Like Destro's just a bit lacking when it comes to like getting that relevant value out, because other classes kill things so fast, or Remnant Orbs, for example. A lot of things happened over the course of SOD that just made Destro not as relevant, not as good, and like I said, the starting point wasn't incredibly high in the first place. So hopefully we address that all today. So yeah, before we get too far into the video, any weak auras or profiles or anything here, you can grab them all for free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by and grab them, feel free to do so. If you aren't subbed to the channel as well, here, we are getting very close to 50k subs once again after the subpocalypse that happened a few months ago and everything. So if you aren't subbed and wouldn't mind doing so, or like to see more WoW content, be sure to smash the sub button and hit the like button while you're down there as well. With that being said, let's get into the video, starting off with, I guess, wanted, desired talent changes for Destro. Okay, so before we get into it, I am Kyrian now. I'm just leveling Renown. There's no secret hidden build here playing AF Conduits as Destro. I just am leveling Renown. So get that out of the way right now. Talent-wise, so there are some for Destro that, there's probably a handful of talents that things could be addressed a bit. For the most part, you could have just taken this build, like with either Roaring Blades or Reign of Chaos since like day one of Shadowlands, and been more than fine. Shadowburn has seen some play. They changed it in 9.1. I believe to now give you the shard back and recharge. I believe they changed something and it made it better on certain fights like Kel'Thuzad, Explosive Weeks and Plus, certain settings like that. For the most part, I mean, it's played in niche settings. 15-row Eradication Soulfire. Eradication is fine. Technically, it sims a little higher than Flashover, but realistically, people just play Flashover for, I guess, consistency. Ease of play, not having to maintain and weave Chaos Pulse as much. Sort of how it was in BFA as well, when you had Eradication simming higher than Flashover most of the time, you still ended up playing Flashover. Also, Flashover Cinders synergy, 3 conflict rates, and there you go. The only talent in this row that probably needs to be addressed would be Soulfire. Now, this during beta did actually give you an instant cast Incinerate and not apply Immolate. I would like to see that come back. That'd be a cool suggestion, a cool change they could do. And also, on top of that, I wouldn't mind seeing this actually affected by Backdraft, which is the stacks you get from Flashover, because you're able to Havoc a Soulfire. But when you Havoc a Soulfire, typically if you're going into a Havoc window with 2 targets that are going to be alive for a while, you'll probably have your Immolate up, either by a Cataclysm or applying it manually or whatever, right? So having that Immolate, I guess, a Soulfire reapplication of Immolate is a bit redundant, a bit sort of just a weird kind of spot to be in. But having that having that instant cast Incinerate over the Immolate, I think we actually go a pretty long way. Roaring Blaze, Havoc Windows, instant cast Incinerate, Shard Gen, more bolts. It feels a lot better. Now, realistically, Soulfire is probably just undertuned in the first place. The damage it outputs is not incredibly strong. To this point in Shadowlands, I still have not used it to kickstart my damage. But either way, Soulfire could use some addressing. 25-row Entropy, Internal Combustion, and Shadowburn. Internal Combustion scales with haste, so I mean, honestly, it's fine. I doubt it's really going to see much play with it being the current way that it is. It is what it is. No one really likes I don't like Internal Combustion personally, so it's fine. Probably could just scale with Intellect or something else besides haste, because like hasted Immolate ticks, Chaos consuming a certain part of your Immolate being hasted for more ticks. It's sort of awkward. If they're going to change Internal Combustion and try and make it better, it probably would be a step in the right direction to make it scale like with something else. I don't know, Mastery, just baseline Intellect, I don't know. Entropy and Shadowburn are fine, totally fine. You basically play Entropy everywhere. A mini Lust, Heroism, whatever you want to call it, on a proc for 8 seconds is pretty strong, especially in Havoc windows in certain settings. 35-row Inferno, Fire, Brimstone, Cataclysm. The only option you take here is actually Cataclysm. Now, the tier set, which we'll talk about in a minute here, does indeed give you instant cast Rain of Fires at times if it procs off of a Chaos Bolt cast. which does add some value to Inferno. Now, my brief napkin math, it doesn't seem to give like really any kind of relevancy to Inferno in single target, still compared to Cataclysm. Cata is a single target gain. It is an AoE gain. It applies Immolate. It is just good. Inferno is undertuned. You really only play it in like Mythic Plus, like playing this build, which is like, you know, insane refunds, but realistically, it's not really played in anything with like high-end, you know, this build here, I can't change talents, in like high-end MDI settings, because Pugs, you can't really play this build in. Fire and Brimstone is incredibly undertuned. The Shard Gen is fine, but realistically, they probably just need to buff the actual like damage Incinerate does. It hits like a wet noodle. Even playing Necrolord with Shard of Annihilation and Decimating Bolt, Fire and Brimstone, it just hits for absolutely nothing. They could probably make it 70% damage to surrounding targets, and it would be fine with the same Shard Gen. And realistically, that might make it a better choice when it comes to AoE over like Cataclysm or Inferno. But let's be real, like Cata's AoE, explosion, impact damage, and applying Immolate to X amount of targets is just so good for Destro. It should honestly be baseline. 40 row, Dark Fury, this is all fine. Coil, there you go. 45 row, the options here are Roaring Blaze and Reign of Chaos. That's been the same since day one. Realistically, these two talents have been the options ever since they changed Sacrifice to whatever this abomination of it is. Talked about it in the AF video as well. Sacrifice needs to change to either really to a baseline intellect buff or like a flat damage buff, similar to like, I think Frozen Throne, Lonely Throne, Lone Wolf, whatever Hunters and Mages have talent-wise. It's just garbage being a baseline shadow damage proc. It doesn't scale with multiple targets, and it's just not good. You lose your pet, you lose like some of the utility. The kick does get bound to you, but you lose the purge from your fellow hunter. And honestly, when people play it, they see, oh yeah, I did more damage to my pet, but you know, you're losing the relevancy of your pet, and you're also losing Reign of Chaos or Roaring Blaze. It's just not good. It is a dead talent. It's been dead for years. So these are both fine. I pushed for a bit more consistency with Reign of Chaos in previous patches, like giving you your first shard consuming spell, guaranteeing like an Infernal to proc. If Reign of Chaos interacts with the tier 4 piece, I don't think that's a good idea. It'd probably be a little too OP. So I think it's fine where it's at for the most part. RNG is RNG. At times you don't get the right spawns. It is what it is. But if it works with the tier bonus, it's gonna be pretty good. Roaring Blaze is just fine. It's your single target spell, your 2-target talent, whatever you want to call it. Single target, 2-target. Good. Cinders, RNG as well, or RNG, synergy as well, because hey, 3 conflict rate stacks, higher Roaring Blaze uptime. It's just good. So 50 row here, Soul Conduit, Channel Demon Fire, Dark Soul. CDF did see a bit of play at the start of the expansion. Honestly, I leaned more towards Dark Soul just being better in the first place. Dark Soul, increased crit chance. Obviously, Roaring Blaze, Incinerate crits, whatever. Chaos Bolt always crits, and the more crit you have, the harder it hits. CDF is fine. You've seen it played at times. Like, I don't think it's really played much now, but it was played before a bit in Mythic Plus, playing like this build for more consistency and such. But I just think the de facto Dark Soul here, it's probably fine where it's at. I wouldn't mind seeing this castable on the move. Sort of a weird kind of, I guess, alteration they could do to it, but I actually wouldn't hate it. I think it'd be fine. It would actually give Destro a bit more like mobility on certain fights and things where it's relevant. Soul Conduit is just, unfortunately, with this version of Destro, just not good enough. They could probably buff it to 20% and it still wouldn't be as good. Dark Soul Instability and Dark Soul Misery for both specs are just really, really solid. So getting into Destro's 2-piece and 4-piece for 9.2 and Conduits. I was going to wait on talking about the actual tier set towards the end of the video, but we should talk about it now because there's a lot of synergy with certain things. So 2-piece, casting Rain of Fire or Chaos Bolt has a 20% chance to make the next cast of the other free. So that means if you cast Rain of Fire, for example, you can proc a free Chaos Bolt. The Chaos Bolt, by the way, is instant cast and costs no shards. So that's not worded like optimally there. I would assume it's going to change. The Chaos Bolt is instant cast, but if you cast a Rain of Fire and get a proc, you can't cast a Rain off the proc. It'll be a Rain proc gives you a Chaos Bolt. A Chaos Bolt proc gives you a Rain proc. Vice versa. You can't just choose, okay, Rain, got to proc Rain again. You know, now from what I would assume, they can probably chain into each other, and I would assume they can also work off of, or if you cast one of them, I would assume that it technically can sort of work off Rain of Chaos with the actual 4-piece, because the 4-piece says when Rain of Fire or Chaos Bolt is cast freely, you summon an Infernal for 8 seconds. Now, similar to how things worked in BFA towards the end, effects like that, like VOP, typically do interact with talents. So looking at the actual spell data, or whatever you call it on PTR here, or Wowhead, it does seem that it will most likely work that way. So, like I said, Rain of Chaos RNG, it might still be RNG, but if you're getting an Infernal, I don't know, every, 5 either Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire cast, every 5 shard consuming spell cast, it's probably pretty solid. So It's pretty RNG, this actual bonus. We have to wait and see what happens with it when we get on PTR, I would assume in a few days, but it could be exceptionally powerful. It has that Destro chaotic kind of RNG to it that Blizzard loved for some reason. So hey, as long as Destro's good and you don't need the RNG to be good, it's going to be amazing. But if Destro still hits like a wet noodle, well, I mean, you know, a million Infernals are cool, but when they still do 0 damage, 0 times a million is still, unfortunately, 0. So getting into the actual conduits here, Destro has really two good conduits, depending what setting you're in. So we'll get to this one in a minute here. Ashen Remains, Chaos Bolt, and Incinerate deal 7.2% increased damage, X amount of damage to the targets affected by Immolate. Now, if a target's going to live for a while, it should have Immolate on it and a flat X% damage increase to your Chaos Bolt and Incinerate, Roaring Blaze modifiers, all that kind of stuff. This is just good. This is your, hey, I'm playing Destro conduit. You put it in number 1, you set it, you forget it, you never take it out. It's just good. This is your Born of Blood for Demonology. This is your Withering Bolt or Focus Malignancy, whichever one you want for Affliction. This is your bread and butter. You play this. There's that. It's good. So the second one that is played is Duplicitous Havoc. Havoc transfers 18%, X% more damage. Now, if we're on a fight where we have 2 permanent targets and you can get a lot of Havoc cleave, or if it's ad spawning and Havoc is relevant on the fight, basically whenever you can cast it, this conduit is very strong. It saw play on Remnant, Painsmith, Eye of the Jailer, basically any fight Destro was played on this tier because Demo was better in single target. But if you have cleave, which is what Destro's niche kind of like forte is, even more of this expansion I feel like others, because it's just not been good at single target, Duplicitous Havoc is very good. This is a good conduit, solid, but it's dead in single target, so it has a bit of a clause to it. The other 2 Destro-based conduits, Combusting Engine, Conflagrate increases your remaining Immolate damage by X% until Immolate expires or is refreshed. I hate this conduit. I've hated it since day 1. I still hate it. So now it doesn't really change your playstyle a tremendous amount, but I think it's sort of almost like counterintuitive with Pandemic and Immolate refreshes and things. Now you can just wait to not refresh. You can just like let your Immolate expire and refresh it then, but then like what's the point of having Pandemic and refreshing before it expires, right? So it's okay. You're not gonna like put up an Immolate conflag 3 times, you know, waste 2 backdraft stacks, you can cap it 4 and say whatever. It's awkward. I don't like it. I would like to see it change to maybe something like whenever you cast a Chaos Bolt, you know, it takes a portion of that damage and deals it to the target you hit like in dot form for a few seconds, or like maybe whenever you cast a Chaos Bolt, it increases like damage done to the target by 2% or 2.1, whatever it is. I don't know, but this version's gross. I hate it. I don't think it's very good. It's fine. It seems okay, but I'm just not a big fan of it. I think it could be a lot better than it actually is. Infernal Brand, unfortunately, was nerfed a million times over the course of beta. It might be a lot better with the 2-piece and 4-piece tier bonus coming in 9.2, because multiple Infernals, each Infernal has their own individual like debuff whenever they melee the target. It wasn't like that previously in beta. It was 1. So if you have multiple Infernals and you had one proc, you know, halfway into your Reign of Chaos window, one proc, you know, 10 seconds before it, you probably had the actual stack at 15. So that one just procced would be doing like full increased damage to that target. Now they're individual, so that was nerfed. The actual modifier was nerfed. It still could be better in 9.2. I actually like this conduit. I think it's pretty cool. But it possibly could use a bit of a buff. It really just depends on the 2-piece or the 4-piece. If it works with Reign of Chaos, great. If it doesn't, well, you know, we'll see where it goes. Let's talk a bit briefly about Covenant-based conduits, Soul Tithe, and all that kind of stuff. So, like I just said, Soul Tithe, Kyrian conduit. The legendary for Kyrian was changed in 9.1 to actually give you an effect that whenever your Scouring Tithe expires, you end up, what am I doing here? Whenever your Scouring Tithe expires, you get a partial effect of when the actual mob itself dies. Let me pull it up and show you. So basically, if it dies, you get 45% increased crit. If the target doesn't die and your Scouring Tithe basically can be refreshed, you get 15% crit. So they added that second clause in 9.1. That's good for the legendary because it was completely dead if you were in settings where targets weren't dying, right? So that's good. You have the effect of 15% crit every, I don't know, 18-ish seconds in single target or whatever setting you're in, right? With targets not dying. Unfortunately, they just completely left the conduit out and it gets 0 bonus if you're in any kind of, you know, patchwork or non-target dying kind of setting. It's just garbage in those settings. Honestly, it's not even really played in settings where things die because it's just hard to time this and get relevant value out of it. It's just not too good. They should add a clause onto it, like the legendary, but there's probably more it should be in this thing in the first place. So, Catastrophic Origin, the Venthyr one, I'm not going to harp on it too much. The legendary, this only buffs single target damage, but catastrophe is garbage in single target, so it needs to be buffed considerably. the actual ability, and then maybe the Conduit will indeed be better. But at this current point in time, it is just not good at all because the ability sucks itself. Fatal Decimation. Decimating bolts missiles deal 50% increased damage. This is actually not terrible for Necrolord. It's fine. You can have a Decimating Bolt, but you don't really want to because you don't get twice the stacks. You don't really get anything else, and the actual like Decimating Bolt being Havoc is not worth the actual like cast time and damage it deals compared to like Incinerate, generating shards, fueling more Chaos Bolts, or Chaos Bolt itself. It's not bad though. The damage it deals is fine. It does sim, I believe, like typically Destro, I believe, plays Ashen, Combusting Engine, and I believe this in single target if you're an Necrolord. It's not terrible. Hey, I wouldn't mind seeing it buff or change the way it was in beta, but it's fine the way that it is, I suppose. Soul Eater, this is the big knife one. This is just good across the board. Soul Rot's damage and radius is increased by 25x%. Keep in mind, Soul Rot deals twice the amount of damage to the target that you cast it on, and than the other cleave mobs that are hit by it, but it deals good damage to every target regardless. This empowers the actual single target version of Soul Rot even more. The radius extension is okay. I've had it pull mobs I didn't want to pull when it's getting so big at this point, like, what can you do? But this is a good conduit. Out of all four of these, this is the best one. Unsurprisingly, it's also Night Fae. A solid damage increase across the board. So this needs to be buffed for Venthyr. This needs to have a clause added to it. And that's that. Overall, Destro has two solid conduits if you're in like cleave-based settings, with the possibility of having a third good one, depending on how the tier bonus actually looks and I guess shakes out come 9.2. When it comes to legendaries, Destro has really two that you play, and that's basically it. But that could change heading into patch 9.2. So, and those two realistically are Cinders and Wilfrids. Now, there's been some hype built around Madness. People have talked about Odir, whatever, being better in single target. It's not, but it does work in single target. So Cinders is like your main rating legendary, unless you're in the setting where you want like Reign of Chaos and Infernals faster than you play Wilfrids. Cinders is just good. Roaring Blaze synergy, obviously third conflict rate, higher Roaring Blaze uptime. Conflict rate deals more damage. You have free stacks, reduced cooldown. It's just good. It makes Destro, this legendary makes Destro feel like a complete spec. Without this, Destro feels slow, clunky, and terrible, which is not really good to hear, but that's just the state of a lot of specs in Shadowlands. Wilfrid Sigil is the one you play, like I said, on certain fights like Kel'Thuzad. We've seen it played on Painsmith, I believe, a bit. Whenever you want that infernal value in a shorter time frame, like 2-ish minutes, give or take, Wilfrid's a solid choice. Now, you also just played a decent bit of time in Mythic Plus, playing like Reign of Chaos with the 2-minute infernal build. And these are really the only two that are played. Unfortunately, Odir is actually not, it's not terrible, even in single target, because if you mark one target like a boss with Havoc, it still will take 25% more damage, like if it's a patchwork single target fight, but it still doesn't beat Cinders. It's just not good enough. It's fine in certain cleave based fights, but realistically Cinders carries over a lot of cleave value too, and we haven't really encountered a whole lot of fights where you have that permanent 2-target cleave. You have it in the first half of the 9, but honestly they just die and it's patchwork, right? So it hasn't really had its time to shine, I guess. They could change in 9.2 depending on fight design. I don't think it's terrible. I think it's fine the way that it is, and it might see play in certain settings, but it really hasn't had that opportunity yet. Madness is one being speculated upon in 9.2, because Chaos Bolt increases the damage of your other Chaos Bolts by 25% and reduces the cast time by 20 for 4 seconds. Chaos Bolt procs, Reign of Chaos procs, some synergy with 2-piece, 4-piece. It could be good. We'll see, but even in single target and 2-target, it still doesn't beat out Cinders. But if you're playing it with DSS in certain legendary combinations, haste windows, crit amp windows, it could gain a bit more value. We gotta wait and see where Sims are at. Unfortunately, Embers is just not good. Incinerate generating more shards. It's solid, but Cinders gives you more shards for more conflict rate cast. Reduced recharge time on conflict rate. More backdraft stacks. More shard gen there too. Cinders just beats like this, and this because it's what it does to Destro as a whole. It's just very, very good. Synergy's not really played for Destro. Now, the Covenant ones, once again, this could be good if you line up your Havoc windows and things properly, because you can Havoc Scouring Tithe as Kyrian. So if one target dies that has Scouring Tithe on it, you will get the actual big crit bonus from this legendary. But if one lives, you'll get the actual 15% clause as well, and Scouring Tithe will reset. So there is some relevancy there for Kyrian stuff, but like Night Fae and even Necrolord have just beat it out most of the time in 9.0 and 9.1. King Soul Satchel we know is good for Night Fae. It's just solid all around. Venthyr, it's great in AoE, but the Venthyr ability still hits like a wet noodle in single target, unless you're like, playing this in huge AoE settings. Shard of Annihilation, which we're going to get into Covenants in a sec here. This legendary has a lot of potential next patch. Decimating Bolt also increases the critical chance of Incinerate by 100% and damage by 50. Now, pairing this with other effects, Cinders, which just gets better and better and better. Potentially other effects too, though, could shift the power scale a tiny bit. But honestly, like, I think Cinders is just king. I don't think a whole lot really need to change, though. Like, maybe a bit of a buff to Madness, but it's probably fine the way that it is. Destro Legendaries really aren't in that bad of a spot. I could see some buffs, like maybe one or two things, but they're really not in that bad of a spot. Cinders is just good, and it makes the spec feel a bit more complete. Even getting in the Covenants for Warlocks, sort of similar to Legendaries, I guess Destro Warlocks more specifically, there's not a crazy amount here that I think needs to change a whole lot. Like Soul Rot, obviously we know with DSS, big haste, multiplicative haste, amp, additive crit stacking, just solid every minute you have that window. Decimating Bolt empowers Incinerate, so Incinerate damage, Roaring Blaze, Havoc window is more value there. And stacking it with Shard of Annihilation, the Necrolord Legendary, that's the one I'm actually most excited about playing in 9.2, can get you a lot of value. Now, both Necrolord and Night Fae are pretty close when it comes to sims, but Necrolord is currently number one in 9.15 and looks to be, without any changes happening yet in 9.2, for Destro Warlocks. Now, obviously, Night Fae has Soul Shape. There's that. I'm not really factoring that in at this current point in time, but both are in a pretty good spot, legendary-wise, covenant-wise, and just actual ability-wise. Now, Venthyr, once again, Impending Catastrophe just needs to be buffed. I don't really want to get into that right now. The AoE is good on it. It definitely is if you're playing the Legendary. We've seen it played a bit in Plus lately with actual Destro locks too, playing it over Cinders, the Legendary, over Cinders and Wilfrids. Haven't played it myself. I don't know if it's good or not, but the actual single target or two target relevancy of IC is just not there. It's a wet noodle. It needs to be buffed, and the Conduit really doesn't help much either, nor is the Legendary in Patchwork single target fights either. Kyrian Scouring Tithe, touched on it a bit. If you Havoc it, one target dies, other doesn't. You get both effects here, 5 shards, and you get the actual reset clause too. Legendary is not bad. You get value when it expires or when things die. It's sort of hard to time for actual like big damage input if a boss has it, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. I wouldn't be surprised to see some Kyrian locks played in 9.2. Like I said, not really crazy amount here. Obviously, this needs help, but all three of these covenants are pretty close. Necrolord and Night Fae being a bit more ahead of Kyrian, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this at some point. It's sort of odd because, like, legendary wise, Destro seems fine. Maybe a couple things be bumped up a bit. Covenant wise, seems fine for the most part. You know, Conduits could use a bit of help. Talents, yeah, could use some help too, that we talked about with some feedback. But the baseline general build we're playing right here is played in most settings, and it's really not that bad. Like, you bring a pretty solid toolkit with Havoc and things. But there is one issue with Destro that I want to talk about briefly, which sort of interacts with the tier set. So as mentioned, the Destro 2-piece and 4-piece are good. There's RNG tied to them, you know, associated with them. There could be some interaction with Random Chaos. There most likely is. I would assume that gains a decent bit of value in single target and other settings like that, just because of how good the 4-piece most likely is with talent. The thing, though, and I talked about it a tiny bit when we mentioned tier bonuses, is that I like them, but they're... I don't know if I'm as high on them as everybody else. Like, looking at the AF bonus, AF's biggest issue is single target, unless you're playing Malefic Wrath and things. It's actually not that bad, but AF's biggest issue is single target, and honestly, it's the Malefic Rapture nerfs that we had a little bit ago. Number one, bam, addresses the actual Rapture nerfs. Demonology, spoilers ahead, that video will be out tomorrow or so, doesn't really have many issues right now. It's a little clunky at times, but both just sort of build upon its strengths without like having any actual weaknesses as far as Demo's concerned. Destro's main issue, I feel, is that it's still just undertuned. It's been undertuned since literal like beta when they nerfed like 5 different things at once. If we're looking at like Castle Nathria, if Destro was in the spot that it is now in SOD, you probably would have seen it played on like Huntsman Altamore, maybe on like Lady Enerva Darkvein, but we've gone through multiple Chaos Bolt buffs, and the thing is, I'm not sure if it's like Blizzard wanting to like shift Destro more towards like a consistent damage playstyle with like Roaring Blaze, Incinerate damage, and things like that, and move away from the big nukes in Chaos Bolt cast. But Chaos Bolt, I'd say Destro, but honestly, I think it's just Chaos Bolt. I think Roaring Blaze damage is fine, or Incinerate damage with Roaring Blaze is fine. It's all fine. I just don't think Chaos Bolt hits hard enough. I really don't. Even looking at the relevant fights this tier, yeah, some classes can burst faster than us, but even when we get our Havoc value out, like, it's not like... Chaos Bolt just needs another buff. I legitimately think Chaos Bolt needs another buff. Yes, the 2-piece might give you a free one, or like every once in a while, but even when you have all these Infernals down, it might mean more Chaos Bolt cast, but you're not... I mean... the chance of chaining rain of fire into bolt into rain into bolt, like back to back to back to back, it's like a 1% chance. It's not going to be some insane sequence happening every single pull, right? When bolt's just not hitting hard enough, bonus is cool, it fuels more bolts, but when it's just not hitting for very much, it's a bit disappointing. And looking at how good we thought Destro would be in SOD, and where it ended up landing, now albeit a lot of the fights were nerfed, Remnant Orbs were nerfed 10 times, Paintsmith was nerfed 10 times, the 9 was a good Destro fight in testing. It's still not terrible now. The I, people just play Demo or AF on now mostly. It's just not strong enough. Destro, when Destro, Demo, and AF are all good in their own respective settings or progression, Destro is the best. Destro is probably the best prog spec in the game. Typically, it brings an acceptable single target profile, which is the worst of all three specs right now, and a very good 2-target base cleave profile, right? But it sort of lacks in both. A lot of classes just cleave better than us, and a lot of classes put out more single target damage than us. So I think that honestly the best way to address that is the Chaos Bolt buff. You could do a baseline aura buff to the actual spec, which would be fine as well, but I think Chaos Bolt just needs a bit more help. They removed Focus Chaos and like Supremacy and VOP and all those things towards the end of BFA, and I believe they nerfed Chaos Bolt's modifier as well. They buffed it a handful of times from all those nerfs in beta, but I still just don't think it's in the spot where it needs to be for Destro to be that, you know, powerhouse or like that solid prog spec that we've seen in the past. It still might be used in certain fights. It might not be bad, but I just think it's a bit lacking in the damage department, and it needs some help there. Hopefully a Chaos Bolt buff, if not some kind of aura buff coming in PTR. So yeah, that wraps it up. Thanks for watching, dudes. I tried to keep this video a bit shorter than the actual AF one. I know it ran a bit longer. There's just a lot to give feedback on and a lot of things to cover. So if it was a little too long for you guys, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best here, but I can't only cover 18 different systems in 2 minutes. But regardless, hopefully you guys liked it. Let me know what you guys think of, I guess some of the suggestions. I didn't really have a whole lot. Like I said in the comment section below, Destro's like fine for the most part. Its toolkit's not bad, just the damage isn't there. Some things can change, some conduits, maybe a talent or two can be buffed, but it's just the actual damage just isn't really there. If it is though, this version of Destro could indeed be very good. Necro Lord, Shard Annihilation with Cinders, with Madness, Night Fate, Haste, Crit Amps. It has most of the tools, but when you don't hit very hard in the first place, how relevant can you actually be? So hopefully we see some buffs to either Destro itself or Chaos Bolt heading into 9.2 PTR. Any Weak Wars profiles, add-ons you saw here, you can grab free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by anytime, feel free to do so. I also want to give one massive shout out to my patrons. Again, thank you a million times, guys, for all support. Really, truly do indeed appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting, there should be a link somewhere up here, as well as down in the actual video description. Heads up, the 9.2 Warlock spreadsheet will be coming out, I would assume, in the next week or so with PTR hitting. The Tier 3 Felgar rank on my Patreon or higher does indeed get early access to that. Now, if you guys want to see more WoW content and helps with the channel, be sure to smash the sub button below, hit the like button white under as well. Oh, and hit the bell and make sure notifications are on. With that being said, thanks for watching, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon on stream, hopefully in 9.2 in a couple days. Peace.